Hi, this is Russ Walden with Father's Heart Ministry. Welcome to lesson number 42 of the Back to Basics course. This week we're going to be talking about a dream that Daniel had, continuing on talking about the end times. He had a dream about the human government, the progression of human government that culminates with the reign of Christ. He didn't understand his dream, and it required an angel to come and interpret it for him and let him know what it meant. Now let's read that. Daniel chapter 7 verses 15 and 16. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. And I came near to ask one of them in his vision, his dream, that stood by, and asked him the truth of all of this. Now this is an angel he's commiserating with. So he told me, and he made me to know the interpretation of the things that he had in this revelation. So during this angelic visitation, Daniel's made to understand the vision. Interesting, the angel interprets hundreds of years of history from Babylon to ancient Rome in just 2 verses. There is then put much explanation into the understanding of the last, and from the scriptures, the most terrible human government yet to come, that brings great consternation upon humanity and the nations of the earth. Daniel 7 verses 17 and 18. These great beasts, which are 4, speaking of 4 human governments, they are 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom, and possess the kingdom forever and ever and ever. What a wonderful synopsis. Yes, 4 kingdoms from Babylon to Rome down to modern times, but it's the saints that are going to take the kingdom. If you need an eschatology, a study of end things, this is it in a nutshell. Human government will be in manifestation through 4 great world powers, beginning with ancient Babylon, and then the saints of God will overwhelm, conquer, and establish the eternal government of God upon the earth. So the sky isn't falling, the kingdom is coming. And we're not looking at horrid things coming upon the earth. Ultimately, we're watching a shaking that brings about the government of God, lasting for eternity over the affairs of men. Daniel 7:19. Then would I know the truth of the 4th beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and his nails were of brass, which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped the residue of the nations of the earth with his feet. So this 4th beast, even as the king's dream of the legs of iron and feet of iron and clay, this 4th beast is different. So this verse was fulfilled with the emergence and downfall of the ancient Roman Empire, with the beast that was stamping his feet, but then out of the remnants of that comes another revelation. Daniel 7:20. He said, of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. What is this verse describing? And we're just hitting the highlights because we've been covering it for 3 lessons now. This verse describes a federation of 10 powers or governments that come out of the head of the ancient Roman Empire, the beast that Daniel saw earlier in the chapter. Now it's necessary to point out that of the Roman Empire, its headship is the only thing that lasts down to our day, out of its head. What is its head? We can look at the ancient Roman religious system, not just the Catholic Church, but what came out of Roman religious establishment, the blending of the emperor and the head of the church. Constantine was one of the last emperors. He merged the secular office of the emperor with the religious office of the pope, or the head of the church, the religious system. Therefore, the headship of the ancient Roman Empire is with us today in the sense it can be understood now how God represents the Roman Empire as never falling. Its head has always been with us down to modern times. But it's not fallen, but it's gone into abeyance. Not as strong in the secular world as it once was, but says it's going to reemerge at a later time. These events are forming even as we read this writing. And we're not just talking about the Catholic Church. We're talking about a religious system established by the actions of Constantine. Daniel 7:21 says that he saw this horn making war with the saints and prevailing against them. And again, he's not just talking about the Catholic Church, but the religious system spawned out of which the Catholic Church was established. The horn mentioned here is apparently the flagship government of a European community, or what some people call the common market. It's going to consist of 3 European nations unified under a charismatic leadership. It can be expected that this leader is either going to be an atheist or a religious zealot, perhaps like Paul was before his conversion. In any case, he will vigorously oppose true Christianity, even as Hitler opposed the Jews in the 1930s and in the 1940s. And what's the duration of this time of upheaval? Daniel 7:22 says, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. And the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. So whatever God is doing to wrap things up in human affairs, you and I, as saints of the Most High, are intrinsically involved. We're not just spectators. Now, this leader is successful in his tactics of oppression and persecution against true Christianity until Jesus comes and with the saints brings judgment and overthrows his power. And we're not just talking about the saints of old that have died and gone on, but saints that will be on the earth at that time. Daniel 7:23 says, thus he said, the angels explaining to Daniel, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. Or into, what are the component pieces? And again, this is the first aspect of the 4th beast, or the world power. This was fulfilled by ancient Rome. Ancient Rome as a body politic no longer exists, but its head does, and its head is not just the Catholic Church, its head is the religious system established by the Western world that flows throughout the earth today. Daniel 7:24 says that the 10 horns out of this kingdom, they're 10 kings that shall arise. And another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue the 3 kings. So it seems to imply a 10-member confederation. Most likely this is talking about the European community, the common market, the EC, a group of nations coming together out of the EC, arising out of the historic background of the ancient Roman Empire. In other words, Western Europe and the Mediterranean. They're going to have strong ties with the Vatican and other European states. And out of this confederation, there's going to emerge 3 nations unified through the leadership of a charismatic, aggressive leader under one flag. We've seen a unification movement in Europe. Remember the 2 Germanys coming together? In Daniel 7:25 says this charismatic leader is going to speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And there shall be given him into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. So it's interesting, we get a look at God's mathematics. Now, this leader is going to have an ambitious reform agenda, and no doubt is going to brand Christianity as outmoded, as part of the problems of the modern world, not a part of the solution, and is having no place in his new world orders and scheme of things. He's going to bring legal reform and no doubt introduce broad changes in weights and measures, somewhat like the introduction of the metric system. Isn't that interesting? So we're kind of in process in some of these things. Daniel 7:26, but the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. So whatever is taking place here, it is a time of great upheaval. He has an agenda to establish a world power, but he never quite gets it done. Notice that they are the saints of God. In spite of this charismatic leader's efforts to destroy and weaken Christianity, it's going to be empowered to overwhelm and to conquer this fledgling and ambitious world power and the aggressive charismatic leader that will sit at its head. In verse 27 of Daniel 7, and the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole of heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. So this ambitious candidate for a new world power is going to be destroyed, and the result is that all the kingdoms of the earth are going to come under some form of theocratic rule, administered by the empowered believers who participate with Jesus in the overthrow of this corrupt world, Western world government. So what is the overall view that we should take? Listen, we can look back to before the turn of the century, before the Azusa Street revival in the intervening years from the Civil War to the dawn of the Industrial Age, the 1900s. And there were clandestine groups who had an agenda, who's actually stated their plan was to wear out the saints until they could bring their philosophy into the governments of the earth. And some of these groups historically were behind the birth and the establishment of the modern banking system. We have to be careful not to run rampant with conspiracy theories. It's much more accurate to bring your lens back to a wide-angle view and simply see, even as Jesus said, when you see wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes in diverse places, he says, don't be concerned about the instability that you see taking place around the earth, because it's all a harbinger of the coming of the King of Kings. So for instance, when the Israelis back years ago in the 80s bombed the Iraqi nuclear plant, all of the people around me that I worked with at the time, they were all swearing and upset and angry with Israel, and I was rejoicing because I knew that the upheaval that we saw in the Middle East was not a harbinger of some doom and gloom scenario or some apocalypse, but it was a harbinger of the coming of Christ. And I want you to notice in the lesson that it speaks of everything that God is doing to establish his government. And the whole point is we're moving from the four world governments, Babylon, Persia, Alexandria, and Rome. We're moving from four world governments, a human government, into the government of God upon the earth. People say, well, Rome is no more. But yet, Constantine, in the 3rd century, he merged the religious leadership of the church, or the religious system, with the secular leadership of Rome. And that head, remember what that verse said in Daniel 7? It said, out of the head shall come this aggressive, charismatic leader who's going to unify a number of Western European nations and establish a world rulership. At least that's going to be his ambition. And part of the means by which he does that is by vilifying Christianity as part of the problem and proposing to bring the archaic structures and decaying structures of Western European society into the New World, into the new thinking that sets aside, becomes fully secular. But the church is going to rise up. There's coming a revival to Western Europe. There's coming an outpouring of the Spirit and signs, miracles, and wonders and demonstration. Because this agenda of hell is going to be met by a charismatic, anointed, empowered body of believers who are going to be the wrench in the works of the plan of the Antichrist to overthrow. And you say, well, where's the 7 years and where's the rapture? Well, those are subjects for another lesson. What we want to see here is human government becoming more and more contaminated with ego and demonic agendas, and God comes in with the saints. He doesn't leave us out. We're not just spectators. We're a part of His process, and we're a part of His plan. He comes in with the saints, overthrows the agenda of the enemy, and establishes direct divine government of God upon the earth with the saints, you and I, participating. Now, you won't see these things if you're out there comparing all of the theology that's existent, and everybody thinks they've got it all figured out, and most of the viewpoints of prophetic teaching arise out of the late 1800s, and don't take into account the modern day perspective of the information age that actually Daniel prophesied about, that we'll talk about in our last and final lesson next week on the end times. So the whole point of this is not to tell you that Anwar Sadat is the Antichrist, or Henry Kissinger is the Antichrist, or Obama is the Antichrist. Don't you think we need to get past that? Remember, in Revelation it says that the book of Revelation and the things that God showed John the Revelator were the apocalypsis of the Christ. He's trying to unveil who Christ is in you and who He is, God's linear purpose through time. The point is not what's happening in the end times. The point is God's linear purpose through time, as it's stated in the prophets, unveils the reality of who Jesus is in the earth, in you, and what His plan is for us, not only individually, but His grand scheme for the church, right down to the time that God reestablishes divine government over human affairs and puts an end to the corrupt, contaminated governments of man. So we'll continue this and actually conclude our section on the end times next week. God bless you.